So, I mean, it's fascinating to have to tell people that the best advice is to constantly recalibrate the forces that are in opposition within your mind. Do you have any way of helping people in general with dialectics that need to govern them? I feel like, I thought it was beautiful what you said before about these inner city kids. So much of what I hear is people giving blanket advice, which has no sense of what listener it's finding. So, like you teach people to be humble, who are already humble, you're just cutting them off at the knees. Or if you teach people, you need to be assertive, and you've got somebody who's like wildly over aggressive, the person just takes it as license. How do we responsibly push out a framework for balance, which isn't mealy mouth, but really has full-blown versions of these opposing ideas within one mind?
Again, that's why this book, The Dichotomy of Leadership, we had to write it. Because we put the name on the first book, Extreme Ownership. We gave it that name. And that's a great concept when you've got people that don't want to take responsibility for things. Like, listen, you've got to take extreme ownership of what's going on. But it's like you said, when you give it that to someone that's already a micromanager,
right?
Oh, they're all of a sudden they're running with like what'd you say, a license? It's like they have a license now to micromanage.
Double O micromanagement.
Yeah. And they're wondering why things are falling apart on them, and why no one has any initiative anymore, and why they're having to make every single decision, and why the frontline troops aren't maneuvering on their own. Well, it's because you're micromanaging them. Now you're micromanaging them to the extreme. So that is why we had to do it, because these things, as you said, you have to constantly modulate all these different balances, all these different dichotomies. You have to constantly modulate them. And by the way, once you get it modulated today,
right,
tomorrow it'll change a little bit.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, if you had no initiative, Eric, and I said, hey, listen, I might have been micromanaging you, I need you to step up more. And you go, oh, okay, cool. And the next day you show up and you start doing some project that I hadn't even authorized. And now I got to come back and I got to adjust, because now I got to tighten you up and say, hey, I want you to take initiative and I appreciate it, but you still got to stay within the bounds of what we're trying to get done. So I was right yesterday, and now all of a sudden, same mindset, I'm wrong, and I have to adjust again. So you're 100% spot on. You have to modulate all these principles for the people that you're dealing with and the situation that they're in.
So one of the things that I've been really curious about, I don't know whether you react to this in any way at all, is we always talk about teaching critical thinking. But we don't talk about teaching critical feeling. But by critical feeling, I mean that most of our emotions are susceptible to becoming maladaptive. And because they're not analytic thoughts, they're sort of harder to access and harder to influence. I would imagine that when you are in some situation where you're, in harm's way, and you've got a bunch of people that you're looking out for, and you got to get something done, and stakes are very high, the emotions that you might have around your house on the weekend when you're with your family are very different than the emotions you can afford when you're actually engaged in some sort of action in a military context. Do you relate to this concept of critical feeling at all? Does that sound like something that you have had to think about? Am I off base?
I have had to think about emotions a ton.
Yeah.
And what I have found with emotions is, just like every other thing that we have as human beings, they can get out of balance. So if I have a leader that gets super emotional about every decision, or flies off the handle, or shows a bunch of anger and loses his temper, that is not going to be good. People will not respect that. People will not trust his judgment because they're emotional. So we can't go and be super emotional human beings if we're trying to be in a leadership position. And that includes in your house, right? If you fly off the handle with your wife, or you fly off the handle with your kids, that is not going to be healthy for those kids. They're not going to trust your judgment. They're not going to respect you. How can they respect you when you can't control your own temper? And if they do respect it, that's actually scary, because what you're teaching them is that in order to get respect, what you have to do is have a violent, crazy temper. So you don't want to be a super hyper emotional person. What's the other end of the spectrum? The other end of the spectrum is I've shut my emotions off completely. I'm totally and completely detached. I have no emotional connection with the people that I'm leading, whether they're on my team or in my family. And guess what? If I don't have that connection, as a human being, as human beings working for me, they are not going to do what they need to do to accomplish the mission when they see me as a cold-blooded robot. So with these emotions, you have to keep them under control. I'm not telling people, and I don't tell people that they should be void of emotions.
Right.
Because if you're void of emotions, you're a robot, and people don't follow robots. People follow other human beings. People follow human beings that they're connected to emotionally. However, let that go too far and your emotions are out of control and you're making bad decisions. You know, I always ask people, what kind of decisions do you make when you're super emotional? The answer is not really good ones.
Yeah.
But if you completely cut emotions out, you know, if you've got a team and you're going to make a decision that's going to be a massive negative impact on them, and you don't let those emotions play a little bit, and you just make the perfect business decision, okay, great. You made a perfect business decision. You saved X amount of dollars, but you cut that emotional connection with your people, and they saw that you didn't really care about their emotions. Okay, you got the short-term win. You made a little more money this quarter. Guess what's happening next quarter? You're losing 3 people, critical people that went and found a job somewhere else. Some other leader somewhere made an emotional connection with them, and now they're gone. And so your short-term win turns into a long-term loss.